Welcome back to another episode of 40 Facts about the 40K universe. I am your host Gershwin and you are watching One Mind Syndicate. Today we continue talking about the warp as we get into warp travel. So let's get into 40 facts about warp travel. A spacecraft drops into the warp by activating its warp engines. As a ship leaves the material universe, it enters a corresponding point in warp space. The ship is then carried along by the tides and currents of the warp. After traveling in this fashion for an appropriate time, the ship uses its warp engines to drop back into real space. Because the material universe and the warp move relative to one another, the void ship reappears in a new position several light years from the starting point. This process is called a jump or a hop, and the process of entering or leaving it is known as a drop, shift, or translation. Journeys through the warp are usually undertaken in short jumps, of up to 4 or 5 light years. Longer jumps are unpredictable and dangerous. The tides of warp space move in complex and inconsistent patterns, and void ships attempting longer hops often end up widely off course. Were this limitation to apply to all warp travel, then humanity would not have spread throughout the galaxy as it has. It is possible to make long jumps of many light years by steering a void ship into the warp itself, sensing, responding to, and exploiting its currents, and thereby directing the craft towards a corresponding point in the material universe. Only the strain of human mutants known as navigators can pilot a craft through the warp this way. To learn more about the navigators, please check out our 40 facts about navigators. Some individuals are sensitive to the movements of warp space. They can, for example, sometimes tell a spacecraft is approaching even before it drops back into the material universe. Human sensitivity to the warp is not generally well developed. In a minority of people, this sensitivity is far more finely tuned. These people are known as psychers, and they are able to consistently control and use the energy of the warp to affect the material universe. Navigators possess psychic gifts of a specialized kind that allows them to use their powers to steer spacecraft in the warp. The astronomicon is a psychic homing signal centered upon Terra. It is powered by the continual sacrifice of 1,000 psychers. The astronomicon cannot be detected in real universe, only in the warp. It is by means of this signal that the navigators can steer their void ships over long distances. The astronomicon signal is stronger closer to Terra, and gets increasingly weaker further away. It extends over a spherical area with a diameter of about 500,000 light years. The astronomicon does not extend to the extreme fringes of the galaxy, and because Terra is situated in the galactic west, its signal does not reach a massive swath of the eastern part of the galaxy. A warp storm not only obscures the signal of the astronomicon, it is also dangerous for spacecraft traveling nearby. No spacecraft can venture within a warp storm and expect to survive, although there are tales of miraculous escapes and of ships being thrown tens of thousands of light years off course. Once a spacecraft activates its warp drives, it is plunged into a dimension very different from the material universe. It is convenient to imagine warp space as consisting of a relatively dense, almost liquid energy devoid of stars, light, and life, as it commonly is known. Once within warp space, a void ship may move by means of its main Newtonian drives, following powerful currents in the warp, eventually reaching a point in the warp corresponding to a destination in real space. The most difficult aspect of warp travel is that it is impossible to detect the spatial movements of warp space once a ship is in the warp. The ship can only blindly carry on, its crew trusting that it is going in the right direction. The longer a ship remains in warp space, the greater the chance of encountering something unexpected. The current can then put it off course. All warp drives incorporate navigational mechanisms. When the void ship is in real space, these monitor the ever-shifting movements of the part of the warp corresponding to the void ship's current position. It is a window into warp space. By means of observing these movements in the warp, it is possible to calculate a course, corrective maneuvering, and approximate journey time to a proposed destination. Calculation relies on the assumption that the warp current observed from real space does not change significantly during a flight. This method is known as a calculated jump. It is not safe to make a calculated jump of more than 4 light years at one go. The longer the jump, the greater the chance of a significant change in the warp. The second and most effective form of warp navigation is the piloted jump. This method relies upon 2 factors, the navigators and the psychic beacon of the astronomicon. A navigator on board a ship in the warp is able to pick up a signal from the astronomicon and can steer a spacecraft through warp space, compensating for the current changes as it does so. A piloted jump can cover a far longer distance than a calculated jump. Most piloted jumps are no more than 5,000 light years at a time, but longer jumps have been made. A typical interstellar voyage might begin with a cargo ship lying in orbit around the Imperial world. Tiny shuttlecrafts busily transferring precious minerals, foodstuff, crew, and manufactured items from the world below. The loading procedure may take solar days or weeks, as the shuttle returns time and time again to the huge void ship. Once loading is complete, the colossal spacecraft slowly accelerates out of orbit under the powers of its main drives. The void ship heads outward toward the rim of the solar system, carefully increasing speed by tiny increments. Although the vessel's engines are capable of terrific acceleration, the risk of collision with antiplanetary debris is high if the void ship accelerates too quickly or too much, as the sun shrinks in the ship's wake. The density of debris lessens as the ship's speed reaches approximately 1% of light speed. After several weeks of travel, the void ship arrives at its first destination. This is the jump point, lying around the star system like a circumference of a circle. This delineates the point at which interplanetary debris falls below maximum warp density. Once this invisible line has been crossed, it is safe to activate the warp engines. A crew careless or foolhardy enough to prematurely activate warp drives would be lucky to find their ship hurled thousands of light years off course. More likely, the void ship would be torn apart and destroyed, never to be heard from again. With the safe activation of its warp drives, the ship is plucked out of the real universe and enters the dimension of warp space. Its true interstellar journey has begun. Ships traveling in warp space do so by means of jumps, varying in length up to 5,000 light years. Only a long journey would involve more than one single jump. Even so, almost 2 solar weeks pass on board ships before the craft is ready to end its jump. Meanwhile, because of time shifts in warp space, over a year has passed in real space. The ship re-enters real space just beyond the jump point of its destination solar system. If it is lucky, the ship will come out close to the jump point. Otherwise, it may take many extra solar weeks to reach the inner planets. It is always wise to allow a safe margin when jumping towards a star. The ship is now ready for its final haul, beginning by broadcasting to its destination and establishing a new time coordinate. Time in warp space is so different from time in normal space that the crew has no idea whether their journey has taken a few solar months or standard years. The void ship travels at approximately 1% of light speed, decelerating gradually through the denser inner regions. Eventually, the ship reaches its destination, where swarms of tiny shuttle once more make themselves busy loading, unloading cargo and passengers in preparation for the ship's next journey. In theory, it is possible to travel anywhere through warp space. However, the shifting tides of the warp make it easier to travel from some solar systems to others. The short warp jump are always more accurate than longer jumps. This is particularly true when moving a large fleet, which may become spread out across several light years of space over an extended journey. Long established and well-charted warp space channels connect star systems and entire regions of the galaxy, providing relative, predictable conduits through which the majority of Imperial shipping passes. A warp gate is a point in real space which is linked to another point in real space by a tunnel through warp space. The tunnel somehow avoids the normal disturbance of warp space, allowing a journey to be made with a fixed time and in perfect safety. The existence of warp gates represents something of a mystery, and much debate rages over whether they are natural or artificial. If artificial, then none can say who made them or for what purpose. Some warp gates have been artificially enhanced, their entrances delineated by mechanical constructs whose exact functions can only be guessed at. Other warp gates are mere black holes in space. The largest are easily big enough to permit the passage of spaceships, and are usually situated at the edge of the solar system or amongst its outer planets. Other gates are only large enough to permit the passage of small vehicles, or perhaps human-sized creatures. Planetary gates are often disguised, or respond only to electrical, psychic, or other signals, which would seem to indicate a certain amount of intended secrecy on the part of their builder. Many gates appear to be defective and can dump a ship randomly into warp space. Others can lead to a place which may once have been a star or a planet, but which now, no more than an empty space, it is. The possibility of emerging into a distant, hostile alien star also has to be considered. A warp portal is a point in space where the warp and real space interact, forming a stable entrance into and out of warp space. It is not necessary to activate a warp drive to enter warp in this manner, although any vessel not equipped with warp shields would be unlikely to survive for long within the immaterium. Some aliens use warp portals to travel between warp space and real space, specifically the creatures known as enslavers, who live within warp space itself. Like warp gates, portals occur in all places and may appear on a planet's surface. Some have a defined physical form, while others are invincible, or take the form of holes in the ground or a dark cave mouth. Warp portals do have their uses, for there are recorded instances of spacecraft with damaged warp drives, trapped within the warp and doomed to destruction, suddenly locating a warp portal enabling them to return to real space. And those were 40 facts about warp travel. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. We talked a lot about the Imperium's, or I guess warp travel through the eyes of the Imperium. We will get into warp travel through the eyes of the Eldar because they use webways, which are a bit different. So I'm gonna make sure to make a video on that. So subscribe to the channel to get that. We post out new lore videos every single day, so please subscribe to the channel if you're already a subscriber. Thank you for liking, commenting, and sharing, and I'll catch you tomorrow. This was Gersh1 with One Mind Syndicate, signing out.